Imagine it's May 5th, 1888. You are in Atlanta, Georgia, but you aren't walking down a Peachtree Street sidewalk in the sunshine. You are underground. Specifically, you are huddled inside a locomotive drop pit, a dirty, greasy trench beneath a massive steam engine. It's dark. It smells of oil, coal dust, and fear.
And you have to be quiet, because if the foreman walks by and hears what you're discussing, you aren't just getting fired, you're getting blacklisted. You and your family effectively starve.
There are 19 men in that pit. They are skilled laborers, machinists, who keep the railroads moving, which means they keep the entire American economy moving. But they are making 20 cents an hour for 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour days. They are tired of seeing their friends maimed by machinery with zero compensation. They are tired of arbitrary wage cuts. So, right there, under the belly of a locomotive, they take a vote.
And that vote birthed what we now know as the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, or the IAM. It started as a desperate act of survival in a pit in the South, and it grew into one of the most sophisticated, powerful labor organizations in North American history.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Jake, and today we aren't just talking about unions in the abstract, we are looking at the machinery of the machinists. We're going to take apart the IAM to see how it works from that day in 1888 to the modern aerospace industry. We're joined by Rachel, who has been digging through the archives and the legal texts. Rachel, welcome.
It's great to be here, Jake. When we talk about history, we often focus on presidents or wars, but the founding of the IAM by that man in the pit, Tom Talbot, and his 18 colleagues, that shifted the trajectory of the American middle class. It established a fundamental idea that is still the core principle of the Union today, that workers are simply stronger together than they are alone.
It's a simple phrase, stronger together, but mechanically, how did they pull that off? I mean, 1888 was not a friendly time for labor. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and regulation was basically non existent.
Exactly. The historical context is crucial here. In the late 19th century, if you were a skilled machinist working on the railroads, you were essentially disposable property. If you got your hand crushed in a gear, you were fired for being clumsy. There was no OSHA, no workers' comp. Talbot and his group formed what was originally called the Order of United Machinists and Mechanical Engineers to create a safety net that the government wouldn't provide. They wanted to protect skilled wages, yes, but they also wanted to stop employer retaliation. They realized that if one man complains, he gets fired. If the entire shop floor stops working, the trains don't move.
It's leverage, pure and simple.
It is, but leverage requires structure. You can't just be an angry mob. And that is where the IAM really distinguishes itself. Over the last century, they've built a governing structure that is surprisingly complex. It's almost like a federal government in miniature. It's designed to balance local autonomy with national power.
Let's break that down, because I think a lot of people hear the Union and think of it as this monolith, like a single building in Washington, D.C., where all the decisions are made. But that's not accurate, is it?
Not at all. If you look at the IAM's organizational chart, it's actually built from the bottom up. The foundational unit is the local lodge. This is the front line. If you are a member working at an airport or a manufacturing plant, you belong to a local. These people, your shop stewards, your grievance committees, they are your coworkers. They are elected by you. Their role is direct representation, handling the day-to-day grievances, enforcing the contract on the shop floor, and communicating workplace issues.
So the local lodge is like your city council, or maybe your neighborhood watch.
City council is a good analogy because they have their own bylaws and hold their own elections, but sometimes a single local isn't big enough to take on a massive multinational corporation. That's where the next layer comes in, the district lodge. A district groups multiple locals together, usually by geography or industry, to pool resources.
They provide the full time business representatives, legal support, and the strategic oversight for contract negotiations. They ensure that the contract is enforced consistently across different shops.
And then sitting above all of that is the Grand Lodge. Right. The Grand Lodge is the International Union headquarters currently in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. This is the governing authority. It includes the international president, the general secretary treasurer, and the general vice presidents. They set national policy, manage the big picture political action, and enforce the IAM Constitution. But, and this is key, Jake, Districts and the Grand Lodge are there to support the locals, not to silence them. The power flows from the membership.
You mentioned the Constitution. I think that's a word we associate with countries, not clubs. But the IAM Constitution isn't just a mission statement, is it? It's a legal framework.
It is absolutely binding law for the organization, and if you are a member, you really need to read it, specifically Article L and Article 20. These are the sections that guarantee your rights. You see, the IAM operates as a democracy. That means it has an internal justice system. Article L outlines the trial procedure. If a member or an officer is accused of misconduct, they are guaranteed fair notice, due process, and a trial. You can't just be kicked out because a leader doesn't like you.
That's a big deal. In a non union workplace, you can be fired, often for no reason at all, or at will. But inside the union structure itself, there's a mechanism to prevent arbitrary discipline.
Precisely, and Article 20 provides for appeals. It ensures that if you feel a decision was unjust, there is a prompt, impartial review process. It provides internal remedies before you ever have to go to an external court. It safeguards the member against the power structure of the union itself. It's a check and balance system.
This leads us to a concept I really want to drill down on because it sounds like legal jargon, but it affects every single worker's life. The duty of fair representation, or DFR. What is that?
This is the cornerstone of union law. The duty of fair representation is a legal obligation affirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1967 case Vaca versus Sipes that requires a union to represent all employees in a bargaining unit fairly. And fairly has a specific legal definition here. The union's actions cannot be arbitrary, discriminatory, or in bad faith.
Wait, all employees? Even the ones who voted against the union? Or the ones who don't pay dues in a right to work state?
Yes, that is the burden of the badge. If the IAM is the certified representative at your workplace, the shop steward and the business rep must represent you. They cannot say, well, Jake didn't vote for me in the last election, so I'm going to ignore his grievance. That would be a breach of DFR. It would violate the IAM Constitution and federal labor law. They have to act in good faith. They don't have to win every grievance. Sometimes a grievance is just meritless, but they must investigate it and process it without bias.
That seems like a high bar. It requires a lot of integrity to fight for someone who might be actively hostile toward you.
It does, and that's why the union places such a massive emphasis on education. You can't expect a regular machinist or baggage handler to just inherently know a complex labor law. This brings us to the William W. Winpensinger Education and Technology Center.
I've heard this place described as the Harvard of labor. Is that an exaggeration?
It's really not. Located in Maryland, the Winpensinger Center, or just the Center as members call it, is a dedicated campus where thousands of members go every year. They don't just learn how to file paperwork, they take classes on leadership, ethics, human rights, and constitutional compliance. They learn how to negotiate contracts against billion-dollar legal teams. The IAM understands that an uneducated membership is a weak membership. If you don't know your rights, if you don't know what Article L says, you can't enforce them.
So the education is about accountability, justice on the job.
Exactly, and that links back to their motto, justice on the job, service to the community. We've talked about the justice part, the DFR, the grievance handling, the contracts, but the service to the community part is interesting because it acknowledges that members don't live at work. They have families, they live in neighborhoods. The IAM mission includes uplifting those communities. You see locals getting involved in disaster relief, food drives, and local politics.
Let's talk about that politics part. Not national politics, but internal union democracy. You mentioned earlier that locals elect their officers. If I'm a member and I think my local lodge president is doing a terrible job or is too cozy with management, what can I do?
You run for office. This is a critical point that often gets missed. The union is a democracy. Any member in good standing generally has the right to be a candidate for any position, from shop steward all the way up to international president. And federal law, specifically the LMRDA, along with the IAM Constitution, strictly prohibits retaliation against members for running for office or expressing their views. If you want to change the direction of the union, you are entitled to try.
I imagine fear is a factor there, though. Fear of rocking the boat.
Fear is always a factor in human organizations, but that is why the structure exists. That is why the district lodge oversees the local to ensure the rules are followed. That is why the Department of Labor has oversight. The system is designed to protect the dissenter, because historically, the dissenter is often the one who pushes for progress. Remember, Tom Talbot was a dissenter. He was a troublemaker in the eyes of the railroad barons.
It's interesting to trace that line from 1888 to today. They started with steam engines, and now they represent workers building spacecraft and fighter jets. That's a massive evolution in technology, but the core issues, wages, hours, safety, seem identical.
The technology changes, but the struggle for dignity remains the same. Whether you are turning a wrench on a steam locomotive or programming a CNC machine for a composite wing on a commercial airliner, the dynamic between employer and employee is constant. The employer wants to maximize profit, often at the expense of labor costs. The union exists to check that power.
And the scope has widened too. It's not just machinists anymore. I was reading that they represent public service workers, healthcare professionals, even some white collar sectors.
Right, they've diversified because the economy has diversified. But the machinist identity, that blue collar pride, is still very much the cultural heart of the union. They call themselves the Fighting Machinists for a reason. They have a reputation for being willing to strike when necessary, though they prioritize collective bargaining to solve issues before it gets to that point.
Let's touch on the external oversight before we wrap up. You mentioned the Department of Labor. Who else watches the Watchers?
There are several layers. The National Mediation Board, or NMB, governs labor relations in the airline and rail industries specifically. That's a legacy of the Railway Labor Act. Then you have the EEOC for discrimination claims. And of course, the Office of Labor Management Standards, or OLMS, within the U.S. Department of Labor, ensures that the union's internal elections are democratic and their finances are transparent. The IAM isn't operating in a vacuum. They are accountable to federal law, their own constitution, and most importantly, their membership.
So, Rachel, if there is a listener out there who is a member but has been passive, maybe they pay their dues but never go to a meeting, what is the takeaway for them?
The takeaway is that the union is not a service you subscribe to, like Netflix. It's a democratic body you belong to, like a citizenry. If you don't show up to the local lodge meetings, if you don't vote on the contract, if you don't hold your stewards accountable, you are giving away your power. The strength in numbers principle only works if the numbers are active. The IAM gives you the tools, the Constitution, the rights, the Education Center, but you have to pick them up and use them.
And for those who aren't members?
Look at the history. Look at the 19 men in the pit. Everything we take for granted, the weekend, overtime pay, safety regulations, was bought and paid for by people who organized. If you're in a workplace without a voice, the IAM model shows you that you can build one. It starts with a conversation, sometimes a secret one, just like in 1888.
Justice on the job, service to the community. It's a high standard, but it seems like one worth fighting for. Rachel, thanks for helping us take apart the machine today.
My pleasure, Jake. Solidarity.
And thank you all for listening. If you want to know more, look up your local lodge, read your contract, and get involved. We'll see you next time.